Most weight loss plans are one size fits all, not taking into account each person's individual needs. Noom is here to change that. Noom Weight uses psychology. That's why they say losing weight starts with your brain. But it also takes into account your unique biological factors, which also affect weight loss success. The program helps you understand the science behind your eating choices and why you have cravings. Everyone's journey is different, so your daily lessons are personalized to you and your goals. One of the great things about Noom is that it's nourishing instead of restrictive. They focus on progress instead of perfection. You don't have to give up carbs, or anything for that matter. Have cravings? Food FOMO? Noom can help you lose weight while still enjoying your favorite foods. To date, Noom has helped more than 5.2 million people lose weight. Stay focused on what's important to you. With Noom's psychology and biology-based approach, sign up for your trial today at Noom.com. That's Noom.com.
Ooh, a spicy question. I
because
love
the
it.
writing is sort of everything, right? Like you can fix plot holes, but if the writing isn't
So some
there,
readers love that, and some readers are like, "But I wanted more of this." So it's kind of a gamble.
Hello and welcome back to the Right and Wrong podcast. With me today is New York Times best-selling romantic fantasy author Mary E. Pearson. Hello, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me today, Jamie.
Thanks so much for coming. Let's jump right in. Your latest novel is out on the 14th of November in the UK. It will be out as of this airing. It is called The Courting of Bristol Keats. Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, The Courting of Bristol Keats is a reimagining of Celtic mythology, and it spans two worlds, both the mortal world and the fairy world. And it's about Bristol Keats, who, after her parents' untimely deaths, has to return home to help raise her younger sister. And Bristol is used to a rootless life. She grew up always on the run because her parents had a big secret, but it was one that they would never share. There was something that was very dark and relentless that had chased them their entire lives. And Bristol and her sisters always thought that perhaps her parents were witness protection program dropouts. But her parents just claimed it was the artist's life. You know, they were living the free and easy life.
Yeah.
So Bristol, when she returns home, she discovers that no one in her small town is who they claim to be, and that her father might actually be alive. And she is plunged, and she is like us, you know, just your average mortal person. She is plunged into a world of gods, fae, and monsters. And she has to, in her effort to save him, navigate this new world of strategy and magic and survival in a way that she's never had to do before. So everything ends up becoming very much more complicated than it already is when the Fae leader that she made a bargain with to help find her father things start developing between the two of them, and she becomes uncertain where her loyalties lie. Ultimately, it's a love story, but it's a love story on many levels. It's a love story between a man and a woman who are trying to navigate these new feelings between each other. It's a love story between sisters, a love story between brothers. One thing about the Celtic myths is there's a lot of love going on. And so that's what I have in this story. And it explores the lines that we cross that can never be forgiven. And ultimately, that's what it is. It's about lines, forgiveness, and second chances.
Okay, so a lot of themes going on. Obviously, it's another fantasy romance, which is very much your kind of brand. Is this going to be a duology?
Yes, it is a duology.
And that will be the conclusion to the story.
And that is the conclusion, unless I decide I want to write more. No, just two. But sometimes that's how it goes, as you're writing. Other possibilities pop into your head. But yes, it's a duology.
Okay. And have you written the second book? Are you currently writing the second book?
I'm currently writing it right now.
And that presumably will be published next year?
Yes, that is the plan.
Yeah.
Same time next year. So I am just like really putting the pedal to the metal because I am a very slow writer. I am not a fast one. And then just the publication process takes up a lot of time. So it's really a big balancing process that, you always hope that you can manage. Yeah,
exactly. Publishing can be an unwieldy machine at times.
Absolutely.
This is Georgia. So this would be, and I tried to sort of count up the novels that you've written, the novels that you've published. This would be your second duology. You've done 2 trilogies and then several standalones.
Right.
Are they all set in different magical settings?
Yes. My early books that I wrote were contemporary, no magic whatsoever, except the very human kind. And then the other books had, like the Remnant Chronicles, had a very subtle kind of magic. It wasn't, spells or any of that kind of thing. And then the same with the Dance of Thieves spin-off from that series. So this is the first book, my first adult book, and my first book that really has magic going full speed.
Okay, so all the other ones were young adult?
Yes, they were.
Okay, what made you want to move up in the sort of age bracket?
Well, basically what happened is when I finished the Dance of Thieves duology, I just felt, and that was after 5 books being in the same world, I really felt, even though I loved this world, I felt like I had to challenge myself to do some other things. So I just wouldn't fall into the same old writing processes. And so I wrote this book without a contract. And that was the other thing. It was the first book I had written in years that wasn't under contract. And I just wanted to see where it would go and let myself, just put it all on the page, everything on the page, and see where it would take me. And it was a fabulous experience. It was also written in large part during the pandemic. Okay. Which was, we were so constricted during the pandemic in so many ways. It was great to have something that was not constricting whatsoever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as I wrote and I just put things on the page, I didn't have filters, and, the characters skewed older and their experiences were older. So, when all was said and done, it was an adult book.
Oh, okay. So it was not a conscious decision. It was more of a just, this is the story I want to write, and this is how it turned out.
Right. And, I think to a certain extent, it probably was a conscious decision because I did not want to have to worry about my audience. I just wanted to write what I wanted to write. And, that was, that was sort of a conscious decision.
Okay. So it's interesting. Obviously, Remnant Chronicles and Dance of Thieves, like you said, 5 novels all in the same fantasy kind of universe. When you were coming up with like a new setting, when you're doing that world building again, where do you start with the new? Like, does the world come first? Do the characters come first? Does the plot come first?
Well, ironically, I had written the beginnings of this story back in 2016, a long time ago. And it was, it's very interesting the way stories evolve. I'm sometimes trying to find the character, trying to find the setting, trying to find all the elements that go together. And it comes in little bits and pieces and gifts that are put into my hand. And in 2016, I was writing about I wrote a short bit of the story about a girl who receives a mysterious letter and an offer of art. And she goes to a house that isn't a house. And I think some of that goes back to my childhood when I was watching a story and someone stumbles on, it was a TV show, and a character stumbles on this house and it looks like a normal house, but it's not. And it was that unsettling feeling. Maybe just because I was a child, a house was something that you recognized and was ordinary. And when you become so unmoored by finding out that it's not that, that was a feeling I wanted to create in this story. And so the thing behind this mysterious house that, in effect, Bristol stumbles into, it led to a different world. And also, I think part of it is I knew very little about Celtic mythology other than, the big basics. And that would be, that is my heritage. And I'm thinking, why was that never taught in school? And so I'm reading all of these mythologies, and they are just absolutely fascinating. And it just, all the pieces just kind of started coming together.
Okay. So was this the first time you've done like a big kind of research element to your novels?
Oh, no.
Or have you done that? No, you've done that before.
I always do. I always
Okay.
do so much research. I always say when I wrote the Remnant Chronicles, I actually, I set it in a time when there was no technology. My previous novels had been the Adoration of Jenna Fox trilogy. I did so much research on that because I'm not like a computer whiz. Mm-hmm. And so I had to, do, especially when you're doing research in a near future novel, it was set only 50 years in the future. And so I had to find out all the things that are on the, the cutting edge, but we're not quite there yet. And so when I started the Remnant Chronicles, I said, I'm going to write something that requires no research. But then it did, because I was creating this world that had risen from the ashes of another one. And I had to research how things decompose and tons of research again. And I think just any book research is the fun part, it gives you so many ideas. And I love, whether I'm reading about clothing or architecture, all of those things just get the juices going.
Okay. So it sounds like no matter what your setting or your time period, you're always going to find something to research.
I will.
That's, it's a great way of finding inspiration, because like you say, and I've spoken to historical authors who obviously, a large part of that process is research, where they can get lost in the research and sort of go down these kind of very hyper-focused sort of roads, which are ultimately not going to contribute to the story, but it's exciting and it's fun. And
yes,
the more
yes.
you immerse yourself in the research, the more it feels like I guess there's a confidence element to it too, where you're like more comfortable writing the story. Absolutely.
There's things that I research that never end up in the books, but I feel like that really grounds me. It gives me a really good backstory. Mm-hmm. That I really understand the character. And that is really what it all comes back to, is getting in the character's head. Everything to me revolves around the character. The world building is what helps me understand how this character came to be. And so when I really understand my character well and the world that he or she lives in, they will become more fleshed out and believable.
Mm-hmm. So you put very much the character first. Would I be right in saying then, your books are marketed as romantic fantasy?
Yes.
But for you, would you say that the romance is more important than the fantasy?
No. because the fantasy is the thing that makes my character tick and
okay,
motivates them.
Yeah.
And so they're kind of
intertwined.
Yeah. I read years ago and I can't remember who it is, but they said character is plot is character. And I would agree the same thing with setting. They're intertwined, and you can't really separate one from the other. If you don't have a setting, you don't have a character. If you don't have a plot, you don't have anything that pushes the character forward. So they're all intrinsically combined together.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I'm just aware that, there are some people who will some authors will write something and they'll say the romance was the main thing for me, and the sort of setting was dressing, and it's just a different approach.
True. Every author approaches it differently, and that's what makes books so interesting.
Yes, exactly. And that's what people call the voice of the author. It's that uniqueness. It's that way of looking at something that no one else does it that way or explains it that way. It's kind of the answer to the question, I guess, in short, is they kind of come together. The world and the characters, they are the inception point for your stories.
Yes. I would say I do tend to have romance in my books. I think there's usually a love story, and I think that's something that is such a important part of our lives, is finding someone who gets us. And so, but then, there's the other life and all the complications. So I just find exploring that very interesting. But the characters actually have to live in a real world, and it can't just be all about them, looking into each other's eyes and falling in love and all of that stuff. There's a real world out there, and that's, what all of us deal with. It is actually like real life.
Yeah. That's it. It's about making it, because in the end, it's about being relatable. It's about the reader picking it up and finding something that they can sort of, even if it's set, on a different planet with a different, with aliens and things, it's about them being like, oh, but that's a very human reaction, and that's something I would have done, or
exactly. And I think also fantasy, I think it is like poetry in many ways. It has a way of giving us a glimpse of our world through a different lens. Sometimes we can't see our world for what it is, and I think fantasy gives us, a new way to see it. So.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And you can sort of go into more controversial or darker topics in fantasy because it's sort of one step removed from reality.
Right.
Yeah, which can be really interesting. And obviously over the vast course of publishing, there have been many authors that have done so.
Well, right. I have people in my books that get killed all the time. And, that doesn't really happen in my everyday life.
Yeah.
I can imagine it. So.
Yeah, exactly. If you were reading a contemporary story, there would probably be less death involved.
Yes.
Getting back onto you, and I'd love to ask a bit about your kind of process and how you approach the writing. And are you the sort of writer that plans everything out, or are you the type that simply take an idea and run with it?
My process has evolved over the years, and I've done both. I have done a complete seat of my pants type of story, and I'm not very good at outlining, but I've arrived at a place where, I think very often it's just semantics. It's the way we describe it. One author will say that they pants it, but they very much outline in their head. And I think that is kind of what I do. Is I do lots and lots of thinking. I go for walks every day and plan out scenes. And so I am outlining, but when I try to write it on paper, I cannot do it that way, but I can write down scenes that I see coming. And so usually what I do is I've gotten into this Post-it note system where I write down all of my scenes, that I know of. And as more scenes come to me, I write it down on a Post-it note and I put them on a board. And so I can see kind of places that I'm writing towards. Well, as I write towards those things, those scenes, sometimes other scenes fall by the wayside. They no longer fit. And so they go in the trash, and it makes it really easy. I don't have to erase or do anything like that. I can rearrange. I can move this up and move something else back, tweak it a little bit. So there is definitely a outlining process that goes on in my head, because what happens is these characters are alive in my head and I hear them talk. And it that is kind of my driving motivation. And so, I think the Post-it note process really works well for organic writers, ones who maybe can't envision every single thing in an outline form, but they can envision things that will happen to their characters, but they don't want to be, married to it for sure.
Yeah. So I'm picturing this as you kind of have an idea of what you're doing for the next like 2 or 3 chapters, but not all the way to the end. And then you can kind of, as you're writing, you're kind of evolving and changing that and taking things out and adding things in.
Well, to an extent, actually, I do usually always know the end.
Okay.
I know the end game, and I know some of the places in between, but all that connective tissue is the stuff I have to figure out. But knowing the end game, and I have been wrong. Sometimes the end game changes a little bit, and that's okay. But as long as I think having a scene in mind and an outcome in mind to write toward is extremely helpful.
Yeah, I'm not someone who would intricately plan, but I think I always have an idea of how something is going to end, because it seems terrifying to write. So, and I have friends who write without knowing what the end's going to be, and that seems insane to me, but they make it work.
Yeah. The thing is, I think it's good to know where you're going, but also be flexible. And it's like, oh, this might be better. So, even for The Courting of Bristol Keats, I had one really far out ending in mind when I first started writing this. And that just went by the wayside because this world became bigger than what I had imagined.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes you have to find the ending by actually writing most of the story.
Right.
Yeah. And I wanted to touch on, so you mentioned that you were actually a slow writer, but you're publishing at least a novel a year by my count. Is that about right?
Yeah, that's about right. Although there is a big gap between Vow of Thieves, which came out in 2019, and then this one. So that's like a 5-year gap, but that's, partially because of the pandemic and also, setting out on this path that I didn't know where I was going. I was just going to follow it. And that made it a longer process. And without having a deadline, I could take more time.
Yeah.
So, but when I was doing the Remnant Chronicles, and my books are big, they're not little. And I think that's one reason I needed that little bit of a break. They're about 500 pages a crack. And being a slow writer, that means I was writing all the time, all day long. And it's hard to write a book a year, but that's what I was doing. I don't know how I did it actually for that, but I'm doing it again. So
yeah. Do you have do you like keep yourself on a routine, like a strict kind of regime to get the words down?
I do. I aim to write 1,000 words a day, more if I can. It just depends. And I try to do that every day. I'm one of those people who, if I'm away from the story for too long, the bubbling juices kind of simmer down. And so I'm one of those people, and it's not for everybody, but I very much think writing every day really kind of keeps, everything going. So, and even on weekends, it might just be, I might only write 50 words, but it keeps the characters and their world in my head. So, and a lot of writing happens not at the keyboard, but when you're on walks, when you're out grocery shopping, and we all know about showers. So there's a million different places where writing can take place.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's I've always subscribed to that idea of no matter how much it is, like as long as you're moving in a positive direction, the direction that you want to be heading every day, like one step is fine if that's all you're going to take. So I think that's a great way to look at it.
Absolutely. I have a mantra that, there's days when I'm just not in the mood, and it's like, okay, just open up the file, write 10 words, just write 10 words and you're done. And it's amazing how, you write 10 words and then it's 20 and then it's 15. Before you know it, you've written a couple hundred words. So a lot of it is just facing that screen. And once you get past that, then, the words start to flow.
No, I absolutely agree with that. We're at the point in the episode where we head over to the desert island. So, Mary, if you were stranded on a desert island with a single book, which book do you hope that it would be?
Well, of course, Jamie, that is like the cruelest question to ask.
Yes.
Honestly, I would have to say probably might be a cheat, but a collection of poetry, just reading poetry, because each little poem is a story in itself, and poetry just leads to all kinds of story worlds in my head. So, I don't get the chance just to peruse poetry books so much anymore, but when I do, it's like going home. And so definitely a collection of poetry.
Yeah, that's a nice choice. I've had a few people with a similar sentiment. Do you have a favorite poet?
Oh my goodness. Edna St. Vincent Millay, Emily Dickinson, E. Cummings. There's just so many.
Yeah. So you'd want a collection which is like of many different authors as opposed to just all by one.
Oh yes, for sure.
Okay, no, that's a great choice. And with poetry, I always say it's the sort of thing that you can just keep rereading it and see a different point of view and like find different meaning every time you read it.
Oh yes, I think that's the beauty of it, is that sometimes it can be obscure trying to understand what they were trying to get across, and maybe that is the point of some poetry, is to really make you think. And a different line will strike me differently another time. And then sometimes you go and you look into the history of the poem and you find out where the author was in their life at that time. And you discover that, what kind of motivated them. It could have been a death in their family or, some injustice. So, it has a new meaning. And even actually, that's not that much different than rereading a story. You see things that you didn't see before. So,
yeah, obviously most poems are shorter than novels. So
yes,
it feels like a more manageable task to just quickly reread it again.
Right.
So next up, I'd love to talk about agents, about publishing deals, and the rise of romantasy. But that will be in the extended episode, which is available on the Patreon.
There's all kinds of things that can explore love stories. So find your love story and go after that.
Yes, that's great advice and very, very well put, I think. Well, thank you so much, Mary, for coming on the podcast and telling us all about your writing and what you've been up to and your latest book, The Courting of Bristol Keats.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Jamie. It was really nice talking to you, and I wish all of your followers the very best on their publishing journeys.
Yes. And for anyone listening, if you want to keep up with what Mary is doing, you can follow her on Instagram at Mary E. Pearson, on Facebook at author Mary E. Pearson, or on the website marypearson.com. The Courting of Bristol Keats is out in the UK November 14th, so probably by the time you're hearing this. To support the podcast, like, follow and subscribe. Join the Patreon for ad-free extended episodes and check out my other podcasts, The Chosen Ones and Other Tropes. Thanks again, Mary, and thanks to everyone listening. We will catch you on the next episode.